Hi, we're reading The Wheel on the School by Maynard de Jong with pictures by Maurice Sendak. We are on chapter 2, which is called To Wonder Why. There they were, out in the schoolyard, free. Yell appeared again over the roofs of the houses at the distant tower rising beside the dike. He couldn't believe it. But the big white face of the tower clock spelled out 3, a little past 3. Boy, Yella said in wonderment, he let us out almost a whole hour early just because of storks. Yella was beginning to appreciate storks. What'll we do? He said eagerly to the other boys. But Lena took charge. Since she had started with her essay about storks, she felt responsible. It was a wonderful day. The sky was bright and blue. The dike was sunny. Let's all go out and sit on the dike and wonder why, just like the teacher said. Nobody objected. They all dutifully set out for the dike, still feeling happy because of this hour of freedom that had so suddenly and unexpectedly come to them. Still grateful enough to the storks and Lena to be obedient to her and sit on the dike and think about storks. But Yella lagged behind, and that was unusual. Big Yella was generally in the lead. Going down the village street, he stared at every house he passed as if they were something new in the new freedom. But he dutifully climbed the dike and dutifully sat down at the end of the row of boys. Lena sat at the other end. They sat. Nobody seemed to know just how to begin to wonder without the teacher there to start them off. Yella stared up at the sky. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. There were no storks. There wasn't even a gull. Yella looked at the sea stretching empty before him. There wasn't a ship in the sea. Yella looked along the quiet road. Everybody was just sitting, hugging their knees. Everybody looked quiet and awkward and uncomfortable. Suddenly, Yella had had enough. He looked along the row of boys at Lena. The teacher didn't say we had to sit in a row on the dike to wonder, did he? No, Lena said, but I thought, well, he's never given us a whole hour off from school before, and I thought, well then, Yella said, it just didn't feel right to sit when you were free. But the quiet sea and the quiet sky suggested nothing to him. Then, fortunately, a slow canal boat came pushing around a faraway bend in the canal. The 2 men on deck lowered the sail and the mast so the boat could slide under the low bridge. The men picked up poles to push the boat along under the bridge. Yella jumped up. Now he had an idea. Hey, let's all go get our poles and go ditch jumping. All the boys, with the exception of Elke, jumped up eagerly. Here was something to do, fun in the freedom. You too, Elke, run and get your pole, Yella said, and tell Elke to get mine too. I'll wait here. Lena stared at Yella in dismay. Even Elke had to go? When it came to ditch jumping, Elke generally was left out. He was too fat and slow and clumsy. But I thought we were going to wonder why storks don't come to Shara, Lena said. If even Elke had to go along, she was going to be left behind, all alone. Lena glared down the dike after the running boys. All right for you, Elke, she yelled unhappily. She looked darkly at Yella. Boy, if the teacher finds out that you... She swallowed her words. It was a bitter, lost feeling to be left behind all alone in the surprise-free hour. Lena had a sudden, hopeful thought. It must be that Yella wanted them all in on the ditch jumping so that if the teacher found out, they'd all catch it together. Maybe he'd let her in on it too. Maybe that was why he had stayed here with her on the dike. Yella, Lena asked, can I go too? Why, if it wasn't for me, you'd be sitting in school right now, and I could get my mother's clothes pole. It's long and smooth and... Nah, Yella said immediately. Girls are no good at jumping. It's a boys' game. I'd be just as good as Elke, better even, Lena said indignantly. Yeah, I guess so, but Elke doesn't mind getting wet. The girls worry about wet feet and their dresses flying, and they squeal and scream, and then they get scared and go giggly. Yella seemed to have thought a lot about it. Lena could see it was totally no use wheedling or arguing. She drew her wooden shoes primly up under her, hugged her knees, and stared wretchedly out at sea. Teacher said we were to wonder why storks don't come. He even said if we wondered really hard, things might begin to happen. We'll wonder while we're jumping ditches, Yella said shortly. He was a bit uneasy. But now the boys were coming back, Alka with 2 vaulting poles. Yella started to leave. And we don't care if you do tell the teacher. He didn't say we were supposed to sit like dopes on the dike. So Yella did care. He was even worried she would tell. But she was no tattletale. Lena did not deign to turn around to answer. But she couldn't help looking down the dike when Elka came dragging his long vaulting pole. All right for you, Elka, she said stormily. That was the trouble with being the only girl. You got left out of things. And if Elka didn't also get left out, there was nothing for you to do but sit by yourself or play with her little sister Linda and the other little children. What was the fun of that? Well, she'd show them. She'd sit right here and think and wonder really hard. Tomorrow morning, when the teacher asked, up would go her hand. But there they'd all sit stupid and with their mouths full of teeth. It did not seem much of a threat. The excited voices of the boys came drifting back to her. Lena fixed her eyes hard upon the distant, hazy swirling far out above the sea, wanting it to be a stork, but knowing all the time it was just a gull. She wouldn't play with Elka again for a week, maybe 10 days even, maybe 3 weeks. Even if in all that time Yella and the rest left Elka out of every one of their games. She wouldn't bother with Elka either. She just wouldn't bother. She stared hard at the gull. It was still a gull. It wasn't a stork. Suppose a whole big flock of storks came flying up out of the sea. The boys, jumping ditches, wouldn't even see them. But Lena had to admit to herself it wouldn't make much difference if they saw the storks or not. The storks wouldn't stay in Shora, and the boys couldn't make them stay. So what was the difference? Lena sighed. It was hard, being the only girl in Shora. She took off one of her wooden shoes and sat staring moodily into it. She caught herself doing it. It was a lonely habit. She often sat staring into her shoe. It somehow made her feel better and seemed to help her to think better, but she didn't know why. She often wished she could wear her wooden shoes in the schoolroom instead of just socks. The wooden shoes had to be left out in the portal. Lena was sure it would help no end if she could pull off one of her shoes and stare and dream into it a while, especially before doing an arithmetic problem. Lena sighed. You couldn't dream with arithmetic. With arithmetic, you could only think. It made arithmetic sort of scary, hard and scary, and not very exciting. Storks were exciting. Wonder why? Wonder why? Lena said quite hard into her wooden shoe. The words came bouncing back at her out of the hard wooden shell. She whispered it into the shoe. The words came whispering back. She sat dreaming, staring into the shoe, and the seagull was swirling and sailing far out at sea. Still thinking and dreaming about storks, she got up in her nice hazy daze and wandered away from the dike, one shoe in her hand. She went slowly down the street, staring intently at the roofs of all the houses as if she had never seen them before. The village street lay quiet and empty. Lena had it to herself all the way through the village to the little school. The school had the sharpest roof of all, Lena decided. All the roofs were sharp, but the school's was the sharpest. A thin, faraway shout and a shrill laugh came through to her. She turned. In the far, flat distance, she could see the boys. Now big Yella, must be Yella, went sailing high over a ditch. Hard behind him, first sprinting, then sailing high on their poles, came the other 3 boys. And then came one more. It must be Ailka. But Ailka disappeared. He must have gone into the ditch. Now there was a lot of shouting and running. Lena caught herself waiting anxiously for Ailka to appear out of the ditch. Then she remembered that she wasn't going to play with Ailka for 3 weeks. She turned her back to the distant boys. I hope he went in up to his neck, she heard herself saying half aloud. It surprised her, for now it didn't matter whether or not Ailka went into the water up to his neck. It didn't matter that the boys were having fun. She knew why the storks didn't come to build their nests in Shora. The roofs were all too sharp. But not only did she know the reason why, she also knew what to do about it. They had to put a wagon wheel on top of one of the roofs. A wagon wheel, just like her Aunt Ness had on her roof. Tomorrow morning, she would spring it on them in the schoolroom. They'd be surprised.